Welcome to Authors Revealed. I'm Becky Anderson. I am so thrilled. We have Naperville native Robert Fieseler here with his first debut book. It's an incredible history. It's called Tinderbox, the untold story of the upstairs lounge fire and the rise of gay liberation. An incredible history taken from 1973. It's a book you will never forget and will really inform you. It is called Tinderbox. Well, Bobby, welcome back to Naperville and to Anderson's.
Oh my gosh.
I know, this is so exciting.
Happy to be here. Happy to be in the bookstore I used to come to as a little kid.
Yeah, well, we're honored because one of our own has his first book. It's out in the world. It's officially on bookstore shelves today.
Yes.
Yeah, and we are so honored to be doing the launch event tonight here at Anderson's.
Well, no, it's an honor for me, so thank you so much. I remember the first event I ever came to at Anderson's, which was when I came to see Julia Child with my parents.
Oh, you're kidding. I remember that event.
My father said that we cooked your German potato salad, and Julia Child responded to my dad, "Oh, yes, I love that potato salad. We had it. I ate that with boiled beef on election night." I remember that. I will remember that for the rest of my life.
Well, I'll tell you what I remember. Maybe you want to bleep this out. But she was sitting there at the table, and she's wearing a skirt, but her legs were like this. It was very interesting. So that was our memory. But it was like having a complete legend here. It was just phenomenal. And what you saw in that voice, it was totally Julia Child.
No, it meant a lot to me too to be able to meet such an icon.
Yeah. So but we're thrilled. And you know, your family has such a great history here in town.
Oh my gosh.
So it's so great to have you here. We are so excited that this book, I can't tell you what an honor it is to have read it and what it's going to do in the world.
Oh, thank you.
And it's really going to show something that was hidden away for too long.
Oh my gosh,
and that we need to know about. So
that means so much to me. Thank you. No, it was really important to me to be able to write a queer history. I am a gay person. And then just the idea that I was a closeted gay kid who grew up in Naperville, that someday I would grow up. I mean, that kid never imagined that I would be able to write a book about this subject, about a fire at a gay bar in 1970s New Orleans, and then to publish it, and then to have an event here that people turn up to. A part of me just went, pinch me, please.
No, well, pinch me too, because we're so excited. But, you know, this is the untold story of the upstairs lounge and fire and the rise of gay liberation. And since it's just out today, I'd like to know, you know, knowing that this is the first day, and I know it's been reviewed and everything before, and I want to congratulate you. I forgot this.
Oh my gosh.
Starred reviews, and you got the mother lode of all starred reviews. You got a Kirkus star.
Oh wow!
The coveted Kirkus star.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
So congratulations, because authors they drool over trying to get that star.
That was a very special day. That was a very special day. I cried.
And you know,
I tried to tell my mother why it was special, and she's like, "What?
Oh, it's incredibly special.
It's only one star." She said, when you want to get it, there's only one star or no star.
Well, it's not like a Michelin star. You know?
Right.
This is the one star you want to get, and you got it.
No, I was so thrilled.
Yeah. So that's really, really incredible. But also, too, you got, I think, a school library star review, too, which is absolutely great.
Thank you.
But how does it feel, having this baby out in the world? It's on shelves, and people are talking about it. And
it's hard to believe. So the process for this book started about 5 some years ago. And it was, you know, before it was a book proposal, and me trying to work with an editor to convince him I was the guy to do it.
Yeah.
And it was 2 years of research, during which, even after you have a book contract, you tell people you're writing a book, and everyone's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Because how many people have you heard that from?
Right.
Including me. I've probably told people that at different phases of my life I'm working on a book.
Yeah.
Then it was 2 years of writing it, and in the middle of writing this important book of queer history, the Pulse nightclub shooting happened down in Orlando in 2016. And all of a sudden, the event I was writing about, the upstairs lounge fire, which had been kind of relegated to a niche of gay history, was spoken about a lot. It became revived on social media and national news, and it was cited as this important historic antecedent to the lone wolf violence that was made manifest at Pulse.
Right.
And pictures of the upstairs lounge were going viral. And
I know, it was incredible.
And it felt like I'm writing about this thing suddenly that everybody's talking about. It was the most unexpected thing. And then for that experience to have happened, and then the next year of writing, and then to have it out in the world, I don't know.
And it's 45 years this year, isn't it?
It is. It's going to be the 45th anniversary.
45th anniversary coming soon.
Which is
incredible.
Amazing when you think about it. And we're talking about this event right now, and then this is a specific kind of event where 6 months after the upstairs lounge fire, nobody wanted to talk about it in New Orleans or nationally. And it just says something about the quality of the event and the nature of this event, that its legacy has built over the decades, and it especially speaks, I think, to the 21st century quite well.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned, and one thing too, I love the blurbs on the book. You have some pretty incredible people that gave you wonderful endorsements of the book. Samuel Friedman, was fantastic.
That's my mentor.
Yeah, right.
That's my Dumbledore.
Wonderful. Oh, what a great mentor.
He might be mad I said that.
But also Blanche Cook, who, incredible historian.
Oh, absolutely.
Great blurb on there. And Andrew Solomon. Wow.
Such an honor. Yes, such an honor.
Great blurbs on there. So I know you mentioned that you were trying to pitch this idea to an editor, but tell us how this started to grow for you, because someone approached you about doing this.
Yeah, so I had to decide whether or not this book would be right for me when I found out about the idea. I thought I knew a lot about LGBT history, but it turns out there was this giant gap in my understanding. My understanding went from the Stonewall riots, or sometimes called the Stonewall Rebellion in New York City in 1969, which was the event that was seen as kicking off the gay rights movement, or what was called the gay rights movement then. It skipped over to the late 70s, to essentially the assassination of Harvey Milk. And I didn't realize that there was a complete blank in my understanding of those early years for gay liberation. So I was intellectually interested in that, but I know you can't just be intellectually interested to write a book. You have to be emotionally interested.
Yeah.
So I did have a personal stake in it. So in 1995, a man who I'll say was my uncle, but really he was my aunt's brother. We grew up calling him an uncle, died of AIDS. I was 13 years old. And when he passed away, right around the time when I was coming to understand who I was as a gay person, and I found out he was gay on the way to his funeral, actually. And I get emotional talking about it, but I thought I was the only one in the world. And then when he died, I thought he had been the only one like me, and it became a personal passion to try to understand his past and his history. And then that led into my professional life, where I've always been interested in telling the stories of sort of marginalized groups, overlooked people who make the world better for themselves. And when those two aspects came sort of interacted when I became aware of the upstairs lounge fire, where all of a sudden I saw here was this historically significant moment in a historically significant movement at a historically significant time, and I'm like, how do people not know about this? How did I not know about it? And the answer was that for years and years people were told that this story didn't matter. And I think a lot of queer individuals in this country, and even sometimes myself included growing up, were told that our stories didn't matter. So, of course, I had to tell this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And we're so glad you did, because there's so much. That was the brilliant part of the research you did, but unburying all the things that were basically purposely were ignored.
Oh, yes.
Or hidden.
Oh, yes.
Or were shamed into hiding. It was just incredible what you came up with in the research, because that's the most shocking part of the story. You know, of course, the first thing is the tragedy of all these 32 people who lost their lives. But, you know, the thing that surprises me, you know, when you think of New Orleans, where this took place, and we think of New Orleans as this open city that, you know, that people can be free to be who they are. And you've always thought it wasn't in the 70s. And you think that this tragedy took place only about 6-7 blocks away from Jackson Square, when people think of the heart of the French Quarter and everything. So tell us a little bit about New Orleans in the 70s and basically what was happening with the upstairs lounge.
So New Orleans in the 70s was something of a pressure cooker when it came to the subject of homosexuality, specifically because New Orleans, in its unique sort of idiosyncratic Creole culture, had always allowed the vices, any sort of vice, prostitution, drug use, dancing when that was considered a vice, alcohol when that was considered a vice, what have you, and homosexuality were all kind of shunted into a private realm, something you would never talk about but could exist under the rug, could exist in a kind of underworld. And there was a very proud tradition in New Orleans where everyone can do these things, nobody talks about them. So long as you don't speak about it, so long as you don't own it in public, you will not provoke violent reprisals. And especially when it came to homosexuality, so long as you were an eligible bachelor, so long as your lover was a longtime companion, or so long as you had, especially if you were high society, you had what's called an uptown marriage, which was two gay men romantically involved with each other, but married to women with families, you were permitted to exist in that society. It helped if you were a bachelor, if you were called a millionaire bachelor, that seemed to certify it.
Sure.
But so there was this long-standing tradition that that homosexuals could exist in New Orleans so long as they didn't call themselves homosexuals, so long as they never. It was the love that dare not speak his name that referenced Oscar Wilde in that. But so that clashed fundamentally, especially in the 1970s, with the wider realities of the sexual revolution, and especially gay liberation. The Stonewall rebellion had occurred. There were starting to be gay political organizations from city to city, and there was this wider push for homosexuals to come out of the closet, to own their identities, and to be quite radical and quite upfront about it. And that did not work in New Orleans. Gay liberation had not reached that city. In some sense, New Orleans provided the closet's best defense, because closeted gay men could work, could own a home, could be rather successful. But that created a large amount of tension with what was going on in the wider country.
And what I found so interesting is that what Sundays would happen at the Upstairs Lounge and the MCC, which is the Metropolitan Community Church. And people could go to church in the morning and then come back for
I'm glad you broke that out.
And I love that, because there's some, and I think the other thing about the book I love, because, and it's not that you were listing a cast of characters, but in a way, but the real people from the different parts of what made up this whole story and what was hidden away, from the gay community you list, or the people who were part of the Upstairs Lounge, but also to whether it was politicians or it's, from the activist community, or you had a list of those politicians and some very famous politicians that basically ignored this or would not acknowledge that 32 people died.
It was a dilemma for them, though. Oftentimes those politicians felt like they were protecting their closeted friends that were higher up in power throughout the state, right? And they faced a dilemma of 32 people died. It was the deadliest fire in New Orleans history. It was the largest mass killing of homosexuals in U.S. history. And at the time, it was a record that stood 43 years until Pulse. And they faced two choices. Do I express sympathy, and do I validate what back then was perceived as a very dangerous criminal group, or do I keep quiet about this and perhaps coyly do something behind the scenes, but really run the risk of perhaps seeming a little cold towards this event? And they chose to appear that way. They chose instead to downplay the gravity of what had happened in this dire emergency. But I love the way at the Upstairs Lounge you could go to church on Sunday morning and then come back, and it was a great social place where people could feel that they were themselves and be who they were. I'm glad you brought this up. The Metropolitan Community Church of New Orleans was a gay-affirming Christian fellowship. Imagine that. Not that many people know about what's called the MCC for short. And it still exists. It does today. It was a very important. It offered a very important religious role to gays and lesbians who felt left out by the broader Christian movement. Of course, larger denominations viewed the whole idea of gay Christianity as blasphemy. But it was very important, and the Upstairs Lounge for a span of time played host to the MCC of New Orleans Church, and allowed them to have Sunday services in the back room that, when service was done, blended into more boisterous fellowship in the bar area. So you come in the morning and come back in the evening and have or you just stay there the whole day. So tell us about the kind of person that would go. I mean, you talk about that a lot of them were blue collar. Quite a few were veterans. And so tell us the type of person that would come to the Upstairs Lounge. You reminded me, because I've met a lot of the survivors and interviewed a lot of them. They remind me a lot of my uncle who died of AIDS. They remind me a lot of his style of and his era of homosexuals. So these were part of a gay community at a time in gay life when gay life really celebrated its blue-collar origins.
Right.
People ran the gamut in terms of hyper-masculine or hyper-feminine characteristics, but they really contained multitudes. We hadn't been broken off into archetypes yet.
Right, sure.
So there were longshoremen who would work really hard physical labor jobs. There were iron workers. There were people who were grocery store clerks. There was also corporate types that worked for Shell Oil and had to be closeted because of that nature. There was actually technically a vice cop, but it was an individual who were a law enforcement officer who was straight, but who was a member of the U.S. Customs. Would come to drink there because the crowd was so welcoming. So it was a sort of all welcome type of environment, very fun, judgment-free, but they also did have rules within the confines of how to keep it sort of a social gathering place and a community gathering place.
Right.
So no drugs were permitted there and no drug use, which is something for the 1970s, actually, that a bar will not even permit, marijuana smoke was a big deal.
Yeah.
There was no sexual activity that was flagrant and overt involved. So the reputation of the idea that this wasn't a bathhouse.
Right.
This wasn't one of the more wilder bars. This was a place where couples went. Oftentimes couples who'd been joined in, they were unofficial spiritual conjugations by the MCC Church called Holy Unions.
Okay.
They would come to meet each other, and it was a place you'd go to meet friends, or it's a place where you would go to make friends. People forget that in today's bar culture and society where everyone just goes, we go to meet people we already know usually. Back in the 70s, you would go to a bar to strike up a conversation and make a friend, and that was often common. And the bartender at the upstairs lounge, Buddy Rasmussen, was a wonderful, garrulous character.
What a great person.
Yeah.
Well, and also his partner, his lover, was an interesting guy too.
He was Adam Fontenot.
Yeah.
Sadly perished in the upstairs lounge fire. Up to that point, though, I mean, Buddy and Adam were, centerpieces of the bar.
Right.
And they really had made friends with everyone. And they were great conduits of conversation. And then Adam Fontenot had evidently a great singing voice. And there was a baby grand piano in the corner of the upstairs lounge where he would sit down after having a few and pound out a few jazz ditties. And oftentimes, there were piano players there that would take requests. So this was just a
great place.
A great place to have fun.
So tell us about that night and what happened and with the arsonist.
Yeah.
And I know there's still, it has not been solved, but,
It hasn't.
but there are things you have talked about that were ignored.
Right.
The police pretty much didn't put a lot of effort into solving this crime.
Right,
And
yeah, it
there's
was a
lot to
less
that.
than thorough investigation, certainly.
right,
That night was very busy at the Upstairs Lounge. So Sunday nights at the Upstairs Lounge, they hosted the biggest drink special of the week called the Beer Bus, which was 2 hours of bottomless draft beer for $1 plus 50 cents for a returnable glass mug, right? So you got the 50 cents back. This was the 70s. This was New Orleans. And that was a good deal.
That is a great deal.
So about 90 to 100 mostly gay men were just having the time of their lives on Beer Bus Night. Beer Bus Night was so popular that it was listed, and there was a secretive address book that gay travelers would have called the Bob Dameron's Address Book.
Okay.
Listed the Upstairs Lounge is a very popular bar, and make sure you go there on Sundays.
Yeah.
This was where. So it was a busy night at the bar, and in the midst of all this fun, a kind of disturbed individual who was known around the dingy block that the Upstairs Lounge was located on, called Iberville Street, entered and kind of provoked a silence. He looked like he was trouble. He looked like he was incredibly intoxicated, and he was known to be a hustler, and he was known to be violent. So people kind of paused, and there was an instant silence in this otherwise large bar when this man entered, and a sort of like this guy's here again.
Here. Yeah.
And this guy, his name is Roger Dale Nunez, caused a bit of trouble and provoked a fight. And because he was already drunk, essentially he was knocked to the ground, knocked out by a single punch. His jaw was broken. I mean, he was clocked.
Yeah, right.
And while the bartender and a couple other people were picking up Roger Dale Nunez and violently dragging him out, this disaffected individual, he screamed out, "I'm going to burn you all out." Or another person heard, "I'm going to burn this place to the ground." But he said the word burn as he's being thrown out.
Right.
And criminologists look for something to establish probable cause called motive, means, and opportunity. So what you have there in that moment is what's called motive. You have an angry person being dragged out from a bar, rejected by what he perceives as a rival clique of fellow homosexuals, because he was gay. Roger was gay himself, or gay for pay, depending on how you consider it. He was getting dragged out, and he says, "I'm going to burn this place to the ground." Then means a person matching Roger Dale Nunez's description walks into a nearby Walgreens and purchases a certain brand and certain size of lighter fluid. Then opportunity. That same brand and size of lighter fluid is emptied out in the front staircase of the upstairs lounge, and then a spark is produced. Minutes after that, Roger Dale Nunez stumbles into a nearby bar looking, as witnesses described him, filthy, covered in black, as if soot.
Yeah.
And he says, "Thank God I just made it from the fire." And people turn to him being like, "What fire are you talking about?" So it's almost like this is
right.
like the cat that ate the canary to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And I kept wondering, how was this man never questioned?
Right.
How was this man never arrested?
But I thought Buddy Rasmussen tried to point that out to the police.
He did. The bartender of the upstairs lounge
Yeah.
who had dragged Roger Dale Nunez out saw Roger wandering around with a cup of beer, looked like he was covered in soot, and tried to drag him to a nearby officer. And what happened was really strange. This was after the fire had happened, after people had exited the bar in this kind of shocking, sudden way. And there are onlookers, and police tape is out. Buddy finds Roger Dale Nunez, attempts to take him to a police officer and say, "You have to question this man. He was causing trouble in the bar before the fire." And the police officer essentially is like, essentially, "Move along here," was the response. This was a time when police officers had never received any training for dealing with the subgroup of homosexuals. They viewed them as part of the criminal element too.
So that was never brought up again. I mean,
no, never.
Yeah.
There's all these stray threads where you're just wondering, why didn't they follow this? Why didn't they follow that? And even now, there are members of New Orleans and Louisiana law enforcement who keep the upstairs lounge open as a sort of active investigation.
It's an open case.
And I asked them, what do you think about all this? And one told me, he said, it confuses me why he was never questioned or arrested. One individual who was a law enforcement officer said, "I feel like they had him dead to rights," meaning they had him set to be arrested and read his Miranda rights.
Wow. And 32 people died a horrific death in this.
They did.
Yes. And it's just incredible. What was really sad for me is that some families were afraid to even claim bodies.
They were.
And some people were afraid to be put on a list of survivors because they thought they would lose their jobs and all the sort of ramifications that could happen.
There were all sorts of penalties that could happen if your name was associated with this tragedy. And many people had aliases, though, for when they went out to gay bars, though. So, for example, an individual named Robert Van Langendonk went by who is an upstairs lounge survivor, went by the alias Robert Van, or Bob Van sometimes. And when his name appeared in the newspaper as essentially a survivor of the fire, his coworkers at Shell Oil approached him and said, "Is this you? Were you in is this Bob Van you?" And he goes, "No, I don't know who the guy is." So in that instance, his alias provided him protection and enabled him to keep his career, because it was considered normal. It was considered standard that if you found out an employee was homosexual, gay or lesbian in 1973, you let them go. That was cleaning out the riffraff. You let them go before they could commit another crime, or there was this perception that essentially that gays were thieves or not to be trusted, and so essentially you had no chance.
Yeah, but the thing is, so this was tried to shove it under the rug, the whole thing in some ways, and ignored, and in many different ways. And here are people that are just suffering from the loss of a loved one and so many other things.
Oh, absolutely.
But yet a movement started as a result.
No, it's very true.
Which is really, really incredible.
It's a unique moment in the history of gay liberation.
Right.
You have, within hours of the upstairs lounge fire, gay leaders throughout the country in various cities, both coasts, all hear about the fire. They all coordinate via telephone, and they all agree to fly in the next morning to reconnoiter near the bar and to, in essence, help a grieving community manage this emergency. And I couldn't find another example of that happening in the history of the gay movement. This was the first time when essentially other cities responded to a common emergency.
And this was done July
that.
1st, so this is basically like 46 cities participated.
Oh, absolutely.
Got engaged in this.
Oh, absolutely. And every city essentially where there was a Metropolitan Community Church, which was 46 cities and the UK, all got involved, all held memorials, all donated blood, all donated money. They founded a memorial fund for the New Orleans victims, where you could send money into a publication that still exists, but it was a ragtag publication back then called The Advocate in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So many men mailed in checks, and many gay bars and gay clubs held benefits and fundraisers. And there was a series of most every city, New Orleans didn't have this, had an alt weekly or a small gay newsletter or publication. And most of those newsletters, I found, made the Upstairs Lounge their top story. So it was the Upstairs Lounge had a very high national profile among the tiny cities, really among the tiny gay liberation community that was still growing in cities nationwide. But in New Orleans, there was nothing comparative to that level of visibility. People within days wanted this embarrassing story to go away.
Yeah. And you know, at the beginning of the book, I love the way you talked about how social movements of many kinds, you can talk about civil rights, you can talk about LGBTQ rights, or so many different rights that and different movements that have happened in this country always have a body count.
They do. It's so sad.
I said so sad, but and this tragedy really did. And when we see what happened at Pulse, you know, in Orlando, but it really does. But it's so sad to think that there has to be a body count when it comes to social movements and people's rights.
Yeah. I mean, look at the history of our country, though.
Yeah.
And we're kind of a violent society.
Yeah.
We balance off the need for personal freedoms with, we balance off those personal freedoms stronger than the idea that we need to have all lasting permanent safety.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, across many movements, it takes a death or several deaths for people to pause and make note and try to attempt to make social changes.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, if there isn't a death, people say, well, there isn't a problem.
Yeah, right. That's totally wrong, of course. So I know the research you did, and you moved down to New Orleans, so you'd be close.
I was down there
primary
for a while.
source, secondary sources, interviews,
I was
everything
down there,
you did.
yeah. I was very fortunate. So two of my very close friends had a bed available on their sunroom, essentially, and I made that my makeshift home. And they were two of my greatest friends in the world. This book would not have been possible without them.
That's cool.
And I spent probably about 2 years of the past 4 down there, trying to understand New Orleans culture, trying to have adventures and misadventures there, so that that is a city for misadventures, by the way, I'm going to tell you.
I've been there.
But
we used to live in Mississippi and Louisiana.
Okay.
So I've been to Lafayette, Louisiana.
I wanted to be able to write about it in a way that felt true to the soul of the place, because that is a great American city. I mean, if it wasn't for New Orleans, I'm convinced that Americans wouldn't have any fun. The French influence, the parade influence of this place, the fact that Americans like to have parties and we like to laugh, there is nothing of the Puritan mindset in anything I just described there. And I think that's because of the heart of New Orleans pulses in all of us.
So a couple of quick questions about growing up in Naperville.
Sure.
And also with parents that are engaged. Your dad, a Naperville city councilman.
Yeah.
And so your parents were activists. I mean, they've done a lot of things.
Yeah, they were.
So what kind of influence did that have on you? And knowing how that influenced even your writing career? Yeah.
My dad encouraged my writing from a very early age. So starting probably about in 6th grade, he'd sit down with me and help me edit school essays late into the night. He's a passion for writing and a passion for the clarity of language.
Right.
He has a legal background. But also my dad does have very strong political beliefs, and he's not afraid to say them. He can sometimes be quite forthright. And I do have that element of his personality in my writing. I think there's a sort of do I dare disturb the universe aspect in some things, and a certain degree of something you could call it hubris or fearlessness in the way that sometimes I'm willing to say things brashly or not round off the edges. My mom raised 4 kids while going to college and earning her BA in cultural anthropology. So my mom was always about considering the other angle of things and considering other cultures. And I think that really mattered a lot to me growing up. The idea, because Naperville's a wonderful middle-class utopia, excellent public schools, bookstores like this, the library down the street is fantastic. There's a lot of things to be envious of, but also growing up here, it is so safe. They call it, it can bubble you in a little bit.
Exactly. It has called the bubble.
To a middle-class mentality. And because of my father's personality, I think, and his passions, and I think because of my mother's commitment to always bringing us to museums, always bringing us to art gallery openings, taking me to go see weird movies when I wanted to see Ghostbusters. I think because of all of those things, I think it led to me being interested in these kind of topics that I write about.
Yeah, right. So, and I know you went to Columbia, you got your master's in journalism there, and you received a Pulitzer Traveling Fellowship,
I did.
which is very cool.
Thank you.
But you graduated co-valedictorian.
I did.
Wow.
Thank you so much. Yeah. No, that was a really great day.
Yeah.
That was like, that was probably the greatest day of my life besides the day I got married, which was better. I need to remember to say that so I'm not in trouble.
Yes, you can't
No, but
forget.
that was my, because I love Harry Potter, that was my Gryffindor wins the House Cup moment. It was really special. I didn't expect, they read out the top 5 students at the graduation ceremony, and I was a part-time student who'd been working, and I really wasn't part of a lot of my cohort's daily student life culture, and I really didn't expect anything. And when that happened, it was so shocking and so special. It really convinced me, really it really emphasized for me that maybe I should be thinking about writing as a permanent occupation, and literary nonfiction writing specifically.
Yeah. Well, I think with this book, I think you've written something we all need to learn about.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
And that's something that's been hidden away. And I think it's a really important book, that we know this part of our history.
Thank you. I agree. I think it's very important, not just because I wrote. If someone else had written it, I would want to read this book.
Oh, exactly. And I think it's a part of our history that we can't repeat. And we see what happened at Pulse, and I know some of the people you interviewed were not willing to be interviewed until the Pulse nightclub tragedy occurred.
They did, and then they came forward. It's I try to follow a Studs Terkel approach to interviewing. So people, I let individuals speak to me when they want to, if they want to, in the place they want to. And a lot of the survivors had experienced such trauma that it was very difficult for them to be able to rehash this out with me, because it would mean they were reliving this moment in a way that might not provide catharsis, because they can't go back and fix anything that happened.
Right.
So when the Pulse nightclub shooting happened, though, I got so many phone calls almost immediately. Individuals had been so on the fence about, do I participate in this book? Do I take the emotional risk of delving into that darkness again? They called me with a sense of urgency, and they were like, no, I need to talk to you now.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where now.
That's incredible.
And some of these people, I'd been doing an email or a text dance for about 3 years.
And this was the impetus that let them open up.
It moved
to
them,
talk
and
about
it greatly moved me.
Well, it had to
actually.
have been cathartic, catharsis for them as well. Yeah.
It may have been. I mean, I had many conversations with survivors at the Upstairs Lounge fire that I wouldn't take back for the world. They were some of the greatest honors of my life.
And I know you're going to be speaking at ALA out in New Orleans.
Oh my gosh, you're
which is so.
me.
I'm sorry, but
it's a huge honor.
It's an honor.
No, it's a huge honor,
and
it's a
to be
little
a keynoter.
It's intimidating. It's not, and it's because. I know why I couldn't figure out why. I'm a first-time author. It's not because of, obviously, I'm not a superstar. I'm not Michael Lewis or anything like that. It's because we're nearing the 45th anniversary of the Upstairs Lounge fire, and I think the city wanted to make a statement. This is compelling history, and also we're 15 years away from the decriminalization of homosexuality at Lawrence v. Texas in 2013. So to understand the Upstairs Lounge, you do have to take a really unsparing look at what the closet was as a cultural institution.
That's right.
And I think people in this current political climate, LGBT and LGBT allies, really want to make a statement of support and say that this history matters.
That's right. And we're revising it to tell the truth.
Yeah, and so in some sense, I'm the vessel for this.
Yeah.
I got to be. I had the privilege of being the vessel for this story.
Well, like I said, this is a very important book, and thank you for writing it.
Thank you so much.
What an incredible conversation with one of Naperville's own, Bobby Fieseler, Robert Fieseler. This is his debut nonfiction book. It's called Tinderbox. It's the untold story of the upstairs lounge and the rise of gay liberation. An incredible history back from 1973. It is incredibly affordable. You will love it. Tinderbox. Thanks for joining me on Authors Revealed.